Hi guys, Tracy here, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different. Today I am making a large batch of cards. I'm starting with some cardstock from Stampin' Up. This is Sahara Sand cardstock in 8.5 by 11, and when you cut an 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock into half, you get a perfect A2 card that you can then score in half like I'm doing right here with my Martha Stewart scoreboard. And that gives me a bunch of cards here. I don't know how many I made. I think I made 12 or 24, but I keep on making more because I think I only made 12 there and I need to have 24. So I just pulled out some more cardstock and I'm just going to use my trimmer here. And I'm cutting some of them in half this way. So these are 11 by, this would be 4 1/4, so 11 by 4 1/4. And then others I'm cutting by into 8.5 by 5.5. Yes, I think that's right. So I like to vary my cards just because in terms of the orientation and how I have them cut, just for a little bit of variety. I find when I'm making a whole bunch of cards like this, today I'm going, well, this happened over a course of several days actually, and over a couple of weeks actually. But with this project, I'm going to be making a whole lot of thank you cards for my Patreon members. So the people who support me over on Patreon, they have access to different videos and that sort of thing. And also, I am sending them all out a handmade card, just as a thank you for supporting me. So I have a whole bunch of cards to make. So here is a stamp set from Stampin' Up. It's called Oh So Succulent, and it has all of these succulent stamp images on it. And I'm going to the catalog, the Occasions catalog, where I bought this stamp set from. And I'm getting some inspiration from the catalog. So these are not exact copies of what's in the catalog, but they're pretty close. And I find with a card that I'm going to be mass producing, I want to have a sense of how it looks before I invest a whole lot of time in figuring out a design. So I have my Misty here, my Misty tool, which is the most incredible stamping tool invented, I think is the name for it. And I have a whole bunch of Stampin' Up inks. I'll list them all off for you. I have Crisp Cantaloupe, Calypso Coral, Wisteria Wonder, Perfect Plum, Wild Wasabi, Pistachio Pudding, Crumb Cake, and Baja Breeze. And I am going to be using my Misty tool for this. You could easily just stamp with any block, but the reason I like to use the Misty tool when I'm doing cards is that because I'm going to be mass producing this and stamping a whole lot of these succulent images over and over again, I'm a lot more likely to be a little bit how should I say that, a little bit more messy, or because I'm moving quickly, I'm more likely to make a mistake. And so I am using the Misty tool so that if I make a mistake, I can just re-ink and that will actually happen right here. You'll see this. So what I'm using right now is Crisp Cantaloupe. And that one just didn't stamp quite dark enough, so I just re-stamped it there. And that's the great thing about using a stamp positioning tool, is that you can re-stamp and not have to worry about having a imperfect image. And so I filled this entire piece of, this is Whisper White cardstock, also from Stampin' Up, with a whole bunch of these three different images of the succulents. Now I'm just going to put them back on the sheet so that I don't lose them. And now I have to be honest with you here. This is not my favorite part of this project. It's actually very hard to line up. This is a set that includes a bunch of two-step stamp images. Or two-step, did I say that? Anyhow, you stamp the background image and then you go back over it and stamp the outline image in a different color or a darker color, or you could do it in the same color, I suppose, and then it would come out dark because you're layering different layers of ink over top of one another. But I have, you'll notice when I listed out those colors, if you're familiar with them, they're all two variations of the same color. So right now I'm using Calypso Coral to stamp over the crisp cantaloupe that I already had there. And that gives me a darker outline around the edges of these succulents. Now the problem with this is that they're not symmetrical, so I have to do a whole lot of, as you can see, spinning and turning to find how I stamped it, like how it goes. And so that is a little bit too finicky for my enjoyment, but I'm doing it anyways. And so I guess when you're using this kind of a stamp set, what I've learned from this process is to keep your stamps so that they're positioned the same way. Like, see how when I stamped all of the first images, I should have made them all pointing the same way so that I could, as soon as I figured out how to layer the outline stamp on top of the base stamp, I could just keep that stamp in the same position all the time too, and I wouldn't have to kind of fiddle around with, you know, turning it and twisting it every time I reposition it. I don't know if what I just said made good sense to you guys. I hope it did. So anyhow, I've skipped forward a little bit. This is going to be a fairly long video. I'll try to cut out some as I go along. But I basically didn't want to show you that whole stamping and restamping process because it was rather painful. I basically filled up 3 half-sheet pieces of white cardstock with repetitive stamps in the 3 different colors, and then I went over with the darker color for the outlining. And now I'm just going to run them all through my Big Shot, and with the dies that come, they don't come together, but you can buy separately the Succulent Framelits dies from Stampin' Up, and this was in the Occasions catalog, so I'm not entirely sure that you can still order these stamps and dies, but Stampin' Up always has some coordinating stamps and dies that are current, and so yeah, this same concept could be copied for any kind of stamp set. So now I just have that punched little piece of grid paper because I wanted to just check it out for scale. So I just had a piece of grid paper on my desk, so I just punched it out with that. The punch that I'm using is, let me go check the size. It's a 3-inch punch, and I am punching it out of the gingham paper that came in the Oh So Succulent pattern paper set that I got with a recent Stampin' Up order. And I do show these products in detail in my recent Stampin' Up haul video, so if you want to see these products up close and I talk a little bit about them, you can check that video out as well. I'll try to remember to link it. I don't know where I went here. I'm going to get something, obviously. So my basic design is it's going to look a little bit different than any of the cards that I was looking at in the Stampin' Up catalog. And so although I did get inspiration from all of the cards in the catalog, none of my cards are going to look exactly like the cards in the catalog. So they're my own design, but very heavily influenced by the Stampin' Up catalog. So now I cut this. This is my sample card that I'm just playing around with to get a sense of scale and how big I need to cut the pieces. So I cut a vertical piece of Whisper White cardstock. And my idea here is that I want these little tendrils that dangle to be on the background of the card, which will be a white strip of cardstock. And so I'm just messing around here with where I need to stamp that so that it'll line up nicely with my circle that I've already cut. And I'm just going to outline around the circle, and I'm using my gel pen, which seems to be running out, so I'm going to switch and use my Sharpie pen. My Sharpie pen is quickly becoming my new favorite pen, and I'm going to have it so that it looks just like that, and I like how that looks, so I'm going to go ahead and adhere the purple succulent onto the piece of gingham the gingham circle, and I'll just layer the other ones around it like this, and then have those little tendrils hanging down in the background. I'm going to pop the circle up to give it a little bit more dimension, like that. And now I am going to outline around the edges of the white piece of paper as well. And the outlining is something that I just do. It's sort of my look. It's what I like. It's part of my style. I do it for a couple of reasons, not just stylistically, but also to provide some definition and contrast between my pattern papers, and to tie everything in together and make it all look like it belongs and give it a bit of a finished edge. I typically really love to sew on the edges of the pieces of paper that I use on a card, but because I'm going to be making about 24 or 26 cards here today, I'm not going to be sewing because I just can't. I would never finish this project if I did that. So I'm trying to be mindful of the fact that I want these cards to be very special, but I just don't have the time to make 30 unique individual cards, and so I am going to cut a few corners as far as time goes. And I'm just having a look at some of the papers that I have, and these are cardstocks that I have, that pieces of cardstock that go with, they're all Stampin' Up papers, and so they go with some of the inks that I've been using. And I thought, instead of stamping the word thanks, I thought I would use this freckled fawn die that says thanks and cut it out of some cardstock, some Stampin' Up cardstock. So by using Stampin' Up cardstock and Stampin' Up inks, I can choose cardstocks that match perfectly with the inks and papers that I've used. Now, I don't have a complete selection of all of the Stampin' Up papers and inks and whatnot. So this one I think is not an exact match. I think it's Wasabi, which is the color, one of the inks that I used, but it's not, no, it's Pistachio Pudding. Yeah, so the cardstock that I cut thanks out of is Wasabi, but the ink that I used is Pistachio Pudding. So it's a slightly different colored ink, but that's okay. I like it anyways. So you saw me trying really hard to figure out how to put the word thanks on that card, and I just couldn't figure it out. So I'm going to switch to a stamped sentiment that says thanks for being you, and it comes from a different stamp set than the Oh So Succulent, but it is a Stampin' Up stamp set. I just can't remember which one it's from. Let me go check. It is from the Avant Garden stamp set, which was a Celebration stamp set from this year. So you saw me just use my trimmer here, and now I'm going to cut a little flag, banner flag, fishtail edge on each side of it. And I'm kind of just playing around with where it might fit. I like it tucked in to the flowers like that. So therefore I didn't actually have to cut the fishtail on both sides because one of them is disappearing. Again, I'm just going to outline to emphasize that banner shape, and there we go. That's my first card. So that's my prototype. And now that I have it all figured out, I already have a whole bunch of the already cut flowers. So all I had to do was go and punch a whole bunch of the gingham circles and cut a whole bunch of the white rectangles and little banners and stamp on them. And I have a total of, I think, 12 cards there, or maybe 13 cards there. So now remember that word thanks that I cut out and didn't use. I thought that will become the base of my second card design. You'll notice that that first card design, I did make a whole bunch of variations on it. So even though it's the same design, I use different backgrounds and paper combinations. And that's what I love to do when I am making a whole bunch of cards, because it keeps it interesting for me. Now, what I'm doing with this thanks sentiment is I'm doing something that I call inlining. It's the opposite of outlining. I'm putting a line along the inside of the die cut piece so that the outside edges of it are green, which is the color of the cardstock, and the inside of it is black. And I really like how that looks. it makes the sentiment stand out quite a bit more, especially when I'm putting it on a fairly bold, like the sentiment itself is fairly light, and that orange banner that I cut is fairly vivid. And so I want that thanks to stand out a little bit more. That banner that says thanks is actually a piece of paper that was just a scrap that happened to fit with the word thanks on it. So that is how I decided to use that. Now this time for this card, instead of using the layered stamping, which kind of I hated because I didn't like having to line up those stamps with each other. Instead, I'm going to die cut a bunch of succulents for this set of cards. And so these are more of the dies that come in the Succulent Framelits die set. And these ones are designed to stand alone as opposed to having stamps on them. And so I am cutting out, I believe there are 4 that I'm cutting out, and I'm just doing it over and over and over again. All 4 of those dies over and over again. And I will cut out some of this, but just so that you can see the process, I've left some of it in. I love these dies, and they really cut so smoothly. I'm just filling as much of that paper as I can with die cut succulent pieces. And I'm trying to keep them all together and not have any go stray on my workspace, because one of the challenges of making a whole lot of cards all at once is that your workspace gets really cluttered up with all of the supplies that you have in little piles of things. And so there is a little tiny stamp that comes with this set that is designed to go on the very, very tips of these succulents, this particular succulent. And so I'm just using some Yeti ink, which is white Lawn Fawn ink. And I'm just stamping, sorry about my head, popping in there. You have to kind of get right over it in order to know where you want to stamp that. And so that's what I'm doing. So the more I do it, the faster I get at getting those placed in the right spot, and also the less perfectionistic I am about it too, because I'm realizing I'm making a whole bunch of these and they're going to be all layered together, and it's okay if one of the petals is not perfectly even, or if all of the petals are not perfectly even. Now I'm taking my bone folder, also a Stampin' Up! One, and the lesson I've learned from this is don't go too hard. See how I pulled off one of the leaves there? And so you just want to drag the paper through between, like place the paper between the bone folder and your thumb and just drag it lightly. You really, at first I was dragging it quite hard, and you really don't have to do that. You just have to do it really quite lightly in order to, what you're doing is you're just loosening up the fibers of the paper so that it can curve and curl instead of bending. Because I want all of these to be a little bit turned up to give it the texture that a succulent actually has. Now, I will be sending these through the mail, so all this time that I'm spending adding the texture is probably going to be undone in the mail because they will get squished when they're in the piles of mail. But I'm hoping that the recipients will do me a favor and just fluff up the leaves when they receive the card so that it'll look nice for them. The glue that I'm using here to put on the word thanks is my glue pen from Stampin' Up! Fine tip glue pen it's called, and it has a needle point. And it's really great for putting really fine applications of glue on things. It's great for die cut phrases and words and that sort of thing. So this is my prototype for this kind of a card, and I'm going to make a whole bunch of them with a variety of different pattern papers that come in this stack of paper, and with a variety of different kinds of banners, and also with a variety of different colored cardstocks for the succulents themselves. So I'm going to take my Caterpillar crop and cut a whole bunch of these. I was just double checking the size of it. So I'm making it just 1/4 of an inch smaller than the card front itself. So that, I believe, makes it 4 by 5 1/4. And I'm just going to cut up all of the pattern papers that I want to use. I'm cutting into that size. And when you cut 4 of those out of one piece of cardstock, you end up with these little horizontal strips. See the orange ones right there? That's the back side of one of the papers that I've been cutting. I think it's this one that I'm outlining right now. And that is conveniently the perfect size upon which to place my things. See? Isn't that convenient? So I am going to cut a bunch of fishtails, and instead of cutting them one after another, I just stacked them all up and cut them together. And I'm going to outline them all. So this is where the mass production comes in, and this is not the most fun part for me of making cards, but it's a little soothing because it's very repetitive and rewarding, because you end up with this big stack of supplies that you can just then have a lot of fun placing, just building together and layering and deciding which banners are going to go with which backgrounds and which succulents are going to go with which banners and which backgrounds and which things. And so you'll see at the end, it's actually quite fun and quite worthwhile. This part is not quite as creative, but as I mentioned, it does have this soothing quality, doing something over and over again. It's very similar to adult coloring, or you could probably meditate or practice mindfulness while you were doing this if you were inclined to do so. So there we go. See how cute those look? They're very realistic looking too. So now I am going to pull out my big shot in a second here. I can see it coming up. There we go. And I'm going to cut some thanks, some more of that thanks sentiment. And while I'm at it, I'm going to cut some more of the flowers, not flowers, but the succulents. And I'm basically going to keep on cutting thanks and keep on cutting succulents until I have a whole bunch of both of those things. So I'll have a whole bunch of succulents and a whole bunch of thanks. And this is old olive cardstock. And I'm going to cut a whole bunch of those. And then when that sheet is all filled with shapes, then I'm going to switch to a sheet of, what is it? Crisp cantaloupe, I think. And I'm just using a shim there to make it cut properly. Some of the dies I found just weren't cutting very well. Now here's that crisp cantaloupe. Cut the paper in half so that it fits through my big shot, and then I place the thanks and the 4 succulent dies. And there's my shim, and I just run it through, and I'll do that over and over again. And now I have a whole bunch of piles of succulents and thanks sentiments. And I'm going to stamp the little white tips on all of my little curvy succulents, the curvy shaped succulents. And I'm just going to do that over and over again. And when you use the white Yeti ink, that's a Lawn Fawn ink, and it's a pigment ink, some of it kind of sucks down into the cardstock, and so it's not a crisp white. It ends up looking like a very pale, a pale green color on the green and a pale orange on the orange paper. So it looks quite nice. I'm using repositionable adhesive to hold my little die cut pieces down to my work surface, to a piece of paper that I can then spin around and around. It's much, much easier to spin a little piece of paper around and around than it is to spin the die cut itself. As you saw as I was first working, it it's a little bit more fiddly, and you're trying to not get your fingers in the ink that's still wet, because pigment ink does take a little bit longer to dry than dye ink. And so this makes much quicker work of this kind of a task. And now I'm going to, again, just go over all of these petals, or leaves, I guess they would be leaves, and just curve them all up. And I won't show that entire process because it's pretty similar once you see it for one. After I'm done, I'm going to put each of these little succulents together using the Stampin' Up! Glue pen. So now I have a whole bunch of assembled cacti and matching thanks sentiments to go with each one of them. And as I mentioned, I really like the bold inlined look of the sentiment, and so I'm using a felt pen, a felt tip pen, it's a Pitt pen, to outline some of them. I'm not going to actually outline all of them because it ends up being quite I guess a finicky kind of a job, and I'm feeling like I'm not doing it perfectly enough. I'm sort of liking it and not liking it at the same time. So I'm going to do some of them and leave some of them blank. And I think that that's going to look fine and quite nice, actually. Now this is a bit of a tone on tone look with the thanks in the crisp cantaloupe, and then that orange piece of paper. I think that's Calypso Coral is what that color ends up being in the pattern paper. And so, you know, it's just a different look. It doesn't have really high legibility, but when you see it up close, you can certainly read what it says. Using the glue pen to assemble those. And these are, I guess, my prototypes of this card. And now I need to assemble all the rest of them. So several days actually went by. Actually, it might have been a couple of weeks. And here I am this morning working on these again. I decided I really just have to get these off my desk and into the mail and in the hands of the people who I want to thank. So today I decided to assemble these instead of making a proper process video. So I hope that you guys enjoy this process. So here I am thinking that I'm going to outline all of these, and I start to do it, and then I realize, wait a minute, I had planned to leave some of these blank. So why am I doing this? So I'm going to finish off the one that I'm doing right now. And basically what I'm doing is I'm going back and I am darkening up and thickening up the lines on mostly the places where the stroke goes down so that it has a slightly brush scripted look. It's a fake brush script, but I kind of like how it looks. It just adds a little bit of interest to the design of the word, of the sentiment. That's nice, actually. I wish I had time to do that for all of them, but it just, like, these cards would never get out if I had to sew and outline on every single one of them. So I did outline around the edges of all of the banners and the pieces of pattern paper for this one. And now it's just a matter of putting them all together. And this is really the most fun part, is where you're deciding which colored sentiments will go with which banners and which pattern papers. I really love that. Now off camera, I have already attached all of the banners to all of the pattern papers, so that all I'm doing here is attaching the thanks and the succulents to each of the cards. And so you probably don't need to see all of this either. So I just skipped ahead, and I'm just showing here that because there's dimension on those pieces of pattern paper with the flowers on them, I'm adhering my ATG to the card base in 3 strips, just making sure that I don't go too close to the edge because I don't want that adhesive to show. And then I'm just placing the mats in it's basically a designed and created card right onto the card bases. Some of them are oriented to be like a tent style of card, and some of them are oriented to be an open sideways kind of a card. And so I will do all of that and realize that I have 2 extra cards here with it that don't have card bases. So I'm going to very quickly cut apart one more piece of Sahara Sand cardstock with my Caterpillar crop, grab my Martha Stewart scoreboard, and score. I keep lines on my scoreboard for scores that I make frequently, including I just put a little C beside the one that is for a card base, just so that I can, without having to think, I can just automatically make a card base pretty quickly that way. On my old trimmer, I used to keep little marks for where you cut for cards as well, but my new trimmer doesn't have that. Now here I'm deciding, I have these pearls in my stash, and I'm deciding to add pearls to the centers of each of these succulents, even though it's not, it makes them look a little bit more like flowers than succulents. I just like the extra detail, and it gives me a chance to add some extra dimension to these cards. I thought about adding some pearls to these ones as well, but I don't have enough. I thought I'd put like a little cluster of 3. I don't have enough to do all of them, so I'm not going to do them. I left it on the one that I tried it with, but all the rest of them won't have it. So, right, so now I just went to my stash and I got my Created by Tracy stamp, and I'm going to use, I think it's Narwhal ink by Lawn Fawn, and I'm just going to stamp Created by Tracy on the backs of these. This is another thing that I'm doing in a faster way to facilitate making like a mass production line type of situation. Normally, I cut this stamp onto a piece of white cardstock, and then I punch it out with a punch, and then I punch a piece of colored cardstock with a scalloped punch. I layer those 2 together and glue it onto the back of my cards. And so anything that you can do to streamline your process and simplify your process, it really helps. Okay, so I'm finished all the cards and I'm ready to send them out. The only thing that I have to do is mat them all, the insides, with a piece of plain white cardstock, and I actually have to go out and buy some more white cardstock in order to do that. But I did go ahead and put some little pearls in the centers of the cacti, even though I don't think that the centers of these cacti have something in them that does kind of make it look a little bit more like a flower than a cactus, but I just thought that it gave the card a little bit more detail and interest and a bit more of a finished off look than leaving them plain. I think they do look really nice plain, and they probably look more like actual succulents when you leave them plain. So, but I had a bunch of pearls and I thought I would put them on for a little bit of extra interest. So each card is very slightly different from the others, and there's 2 main kinds of cards here. One with the stamped and die cut flower or cacti, and one with the die cut cacti from cardstock. And all of my extras are right here. So I'll be mailing those out very, very soon. So thanks so much for watching this process of mass producing cards. And I think that the key to making it interesting and not be so boring for the creator is to try to mix it up as much as possible. Mass produce things whenever you can, but try to do it with slight variations so that when it comes time to put together the cards, you get to have a little bit of fun in how you do the color combinations and that sort of thing. So thanks so much for watching and have a really great scrappy week.